The Texas sun beat down hard outside, a golden glare that promised life and prosperity for the city of San Antonio. But here, inside my small apartment, the light seemed to ask permission to enter. It stretched timidly through the cracks of the blinds, illuminating the dust particles that danced in the heavy, silent air. My world was a sanctuary of memories, and of a time that insisted on not passing, a refuge of furniture worn from use, and a loneliness that had become my most faithful companion. The only vibrant life here was that of a fern, a green warrior clinging to existence near the window, just like me. I am Elena Ramirez, and at 76 years old, my body carries the map of every lost battle. My shoulders, once straight and proud, now curve inward as if trying to protect a heart that has been broken too many times. The wrinkles around my eyes are not just from age, they are the dried tracks of tears I cried in silence during the long nights when the abandonment by my only son, Marcos, became a monster under the bed. I lived on a minimal pension, a distant echo of the comfortable life my late husband, Ricardo, and I had built with so much sweat and sacrifice. That afternoon, the sharp sound of the doorbell cut through the silence like a knife. My heart, unaccustomed to surprises, gave a painful leap. No one ever came to visit me. I walked slowly to the door, the creak of the wooden floor marking each hesitant step. I looked through the peephole and saw a delivery man, a young man with an impatient look, holding an elegant box wrapped in expensive paper. The packaging was so out of place in my reality that, for a moment, I thought it was a mistake. I opened the door and he just handed me the package and a clipboard to sign, without a hint of emotion on his face. I held the box in my trembling hands. It was light, but it felt as if it carried the weight of the world. I sat in my worn armchair, the same one where Ricardo used to read the newspaper, and observed the object on my lap. The paper was a deep blue, with a silver satin ribbon. Who would send me something like this? For a moment, a spark of hope ignited in my chest. Could it be Marcos? An apology? A sign that he remembered the mother he left behind? Hope is a stubborn thing, even when reason tells us not to feed it. With my aged fingers, I undid the bow with almost reverent care. I opened the box, and my breath caught in my throat. Resting on a bed of black velvet was a luxury pen made of solid gold. It wasn't just any pen. It was the exact model Ricardo had always dreamed of owning. I remember the nights he would stop in front of the jewelry store window, sighing and saying, "One day, Elena, I will have one of these to sign important documents, to build our future." A dream that was never realized, swallowed by the necessities of life. Next to the pen, there was a small card, folded in half. The handwriting was unmistakable. It was Marcos's script, elegant and slanted, the same one I taught him by holding his small hand over the paper. My heart was beating erratically, a mixture of fear and expectation. I opened the card slowly, as if I were disarming a bomb. The words I read hit me with the force of a punch to the gut, knocking all the air from my lungs and shattering what was left of my heart. "So that you can sign yourself into your new life," the note said. They told me the nursing home I chose has a beautiful view. Nursing home. The word echoed in the silence of the apartment, cold and cruel. He wasn't just abandoning me for good, he was mocking me. He was using my late husband's purest dream as an instrument of torture, a golden reminder of everything that was taken from me, of all the dignity he stole from me along with our savings. The world around me seemed to spin. The fern in the window blurred. The apartment walls began to close in on me. I held the cold, heavy pen in my hand, and the contrast between its material value and the emotional poverty of the gesture broke me. It was the final confirmation, Marcos's signature on my certificate of uselessness. He not only left me in poverty, but now he wanted to lock me away in a place to wait for death, and he sent me a sadistic gift to celebrate the occasion. I looked into the emptiness of the room, at the place where Ricardo used to sit, and a hoarse whisper escaped my lips, a question meant for no one and everyone at the same time. Why would he do this? There was no answer. Only the weight of gold in my hand, and the piercing pain of a mother who realized that the son she loved more than life itself no longer existed. The man who replaced him was a stranger, a monster with my boy's face. The initial shock gave way to a coldness that spread through my veins. I was frozen, paralyzed by the calculated cruelty of that gesture. The humiliation was so deep, it felt as if it had torn off my skin. He no longer saw me as his mother, but as a problem to be solved, an obstacle in his successful life that needed to be discarded and filed away, preferably with a beautiful view to disguise the rottenness of the act. The pen in my hand felt like it was burning. It was the symbol of ultimate betrayal. He used the memory of his father, a good and honest man, to deal me the final blow. The value of that pen could pay my rent for years. It could give me some comfort, but in his hands, it was transformed into poison. In that instant, I felt the weight of my 76 years as never before. Not in my bones, but in my soul. I was completely alone, with a golden object in my hands that represented how little I was worth to my own son. The sun outside continued to shine, indifferent to the darkness that had taken over my small world. The gift was not a gift. It was a sentence, the worst of all, because it came not from a judge, but from the fruit of my womb, from the person I once swore to protect with my life. The pain was so intense, so overwhelming, that for a moment, I wished my heart would just stop beating. I wished to join Ricardo, in a place where promises were not broken and a son's love did not turn into a weapon of humiliation, but I kept breathing, the air moving in and out of my lungs in shaky sighs, each one a reminder that I was still alive to feel this agony. This was the moment when my world, already so fragile, finally broke into 1,000 pieces. It was the lowest point, the rock bottom of pain and rejection. Before I tell you what happened next, how the deepest pain can transform into unexpected strength, I would like to know where you are watching this story from. Please subscribe to the channel and comment with your city. Knowing that someone is out there gives me the strength to continue. I didn't throw the pen away. I didn't sell it. Instead, I held it tightly, and the cold, heavy metal in my palm became an anchor. I closed my eyes, ignoring the cruelty of Marcos's note, and connected to a much older, purer memory. I connected with Ricardo, my husband. I could almost feel the warmth of his hand on mine, see the sparkle in his eyes as he talked about the future, a future he worked until his last day to ensure would be safe for me and our son. Ricardo was a man with calloused hands and a kind heart. He saw the world in terms of solidity, of things well made, of promises kept. The golden pen for him wasn't a symbol of ostentatious wealth, but of accomplishment. It was for signing the contract for a better house, Marcos's diploma, the documents that would solidify the legacy of a life of honest work. He believed that a man's signature was his honor, and the idea that our son would use that same symbol to discard me would have destroyed him. The pain of Marcos's betrayal returned with full force, not as a sharp blow, but as a chronic illness that ached in my bones. I remember the day he arrived here, dressed in a suit that cost more than I earned in a year. He smelled of success, of a world I didn't know, and my mother's, heart filled with a foolish, blind pride. He was my boy, now a powerful man, and I believed every word that came out of his mouth. He sat in his father's worn armchair and told me about a safe investment, a unique opportunity to multiply the savings Ricardo had left me. His words were smooth and convincing, painting a future of tranquility and comfort. "It's so you'll never have to worry about anything again, Mom," he said, his piercing eyes fixed on mine. He was offering me a dream, and I, hungry to believe in my son's goodness, accepted the feast without question. The moment of signing is etched in my memory. He placed the papers in front of me, a pile of documents with fine print and terms I didn't understand. He just pointed with his own expensive pen. "Sign here, Mom," and I signed. I signed away my security, the end of Ricardo's sacrifice, handing everything over to the man I trusted most in the world. In that moment, I felt no fear, only love and pride. The following weeks were a slow unraveling of the deception. The calls became rarer, the excuses more vague. "The financial market is complex, Mom. Be patient." Soon, the calls stopped completely. The phone number was disconnected. The office address was an abandoned post office box. He had disappeared, taking with him not only my money, but also my faith in humanity. The realization didn't come all at once, but like the tide, rising slowly until it drowned me. What followed was a period of shame and silence. How could I tell my neighbors, my small church community, that my own son had robbed me and left me destitute? The humiliation was a heavy cloak I wore every day. So, I would smile and say everything was fine, while my stomach rumbled and I counted coins to buy bread. Poverty was hard, but the shame was unbearable. Inside me, a silent civil war was fought daily. The image of my little Marcos, with his scraped knees and his tight hug, fought against the image of the predator in an expensive suit who had devoured me. How did the love I planted yield such a bitter fruit? That question haunted me in the long hours of the early morning, when sleep wouldn't come and loneliness was my only companion. I wondered where I had gone wrong. What flaw in my upbringing had allowed greed to overcome love? Sitting there, with the golden pen in my hand, something changed. The pain and humiliation were still there, but beneath them, a new feeling began to bubble up: anger. Not a destructive anger, but a righteous anger. An anger that gave me strength. Marcos's cruel gesture was a miscalculation. He thought he would crush me, but instead, he had given me a weapon. He had given me a purpose. Ricardo wanted that pen to sign important things, and I realized there was nothing more important I could do than sign my name to my own truth. I would not go to a nursing home in silence. I would not disappear as he wanted. I would leave a record. I would make him read in my own words what he had done. The decision was like a ray of light in the darkness. I walked to my small desk, a piece of furniture that groaned in protest. I found a sheet of letter paper, one of the few I kept for special occasions that never came. I picked up the golden pen. Its weight in my hand was a stark contrast to the simplicity of my gesture. My hand, usually trembling from age and nerves, was surprisingly steady. I began to write. I did not pour hatred onto the page. I did not curse him. I simply described my reality, with brutal, painful honesty. I wrote about the silence of the phone that never rang, about the taste of the thin soup that was my dinner most nights, about the cold that seemed to come from within my bones. I described his father's empty chair and how I still spoke to him in my thoughts. I didn't accuse him, I just showed him the result of his actions. I told him about Ricardo's dream for that pen and how, ironically, I was now using it to write the saddest letter of my life. Each word was a drop of my pain distilled onto the paper. It wasn't a plea for help. It was a testament. The testament of the mother he had killed inside me. The next morning, I felt a determination I hadn't experienced in years. I put on my best coat, the only one I had, and walked to the post office. The walk felt like a pilgrimage. I used the few coins I had saved for the week's bread to buy a stamp and sent the letter to his office address in Austin, an address I found on an old business card. Sending that letter was like releasing my last breath of hope into the wind. I had no guarantee that he would read it. A secretary would probably throw it in the trash as unwanted mail. But I had done it. I had spoken. I had used the symbol of my humiliation to reclaim my voice. I went home and waited, not knowing exactly what I was waiting for. The days that followed were the longest of my life. The silence in the apartment was different now. It was no longer an empty silence, but an expectant, tense silence, like the air before a storm. Every car that passed, every sound in the hallway, made my heart race. I alternated between fear of a response and fear of no response. And then, the phone rang. The shrill sound cut through the air, and I jumped. It was a number I didn't recognize, with an Austin area code. My blood ran cold. My hands were sweating as I reached for the receiver. With a choked voice, I answered, whispering hello? That was barely audible. The voice on the other end was not Marcos's. It was a woman, and she was crying. Her sobs were so deep she could barely speak. "Mrs. Ramirez?" she said. "This is Sophia, Marcos's wife." Sophia. Her voice was a relic from a distant past, from family gatherings and smiles that now seemed to belong to another life. "He's sick, Elena," she managed to say, her voice broken with pain. "The doctors said, it's a degenerative disease. It's serious." The floor seemed to disappear from under my feet. The world tilted dangerously. Her words didn't make sense. Marcos, my Marcos, strong and invincible, was sick? Dying? "He refuses to get treatment," Sophia continued, her voice a thread of desperation. "He's pushed everyone away, Elena. He's giving up. He doesn't want to see anyone." The irony of the situation was so cruel, it almost made me laugh. The son who had sentenced me to a lonely death was now choosing his own. Then, she uttered the words that would change everything, that would launch me from my reclusive life into the heart of the storm. "Your letter, it arrived today. He read it, and he hasn't said a word since. He just stays in his room, staring at the wall. Elena, I know I have no right to ask anything, but please, come to Austin. I think you're the only person in the world who can save him." Her plea hung in the air, connecting my dusty apartment in San Antonio to the cold mansion in Austin. Life, in its cruelest and most unexpected twist, was asking me to save the man who had destroyed me. And I, without a penny in my pocket and with a heart in tatters, had to face the most impossible question of all. How could I possibly do that? Sophia's voice faded from the line, but her plea echoed inside my silent apartment, an impossible command. Go to Austin? It was like asking me to fly to the moon. The chasm between my reality and hers was insurmountable. I had no money, no strength. A part of me, the wounded and bitter part that Marcos had created, screamed in silence that he deserved his fate. He left me to die alone. Why should I cross the state to hold his hand? Let him face his end with the same coldness with which he had planned mine. But beneath that layer of pain, a mother's heart still beat, faint and stubborn. The image of my son, sick and alone, even if by his own doing, was torture. Anger fought against a primal instinct, a love that, no matter how hard I tried, I could not completely extinguish. I was paralyzed, trapped between the desire for justice and the duty of forgiveness, a conflict that tore at what was left of my soul. It was my neighbor, Isabella, a widow with a heart as big as her own hardships, who broke my stalemate. She knocked on my door that night with a plate of rice and beans, as she did from time to time. She saw the torment on my face, and for the first time in years, the floodgates opened. I told her everything. The pen, the letter, the desperate phone call from Sophia. I cried, not from sadness, but from sheer confusion and exhaustion. Isabella listened in silence, her presence a calm, solid force. She didn't offer me pity or empty words. When I finished, she simply took my wrinkled hands in hers and said with unshakable firmness, "Elena, you have to go. What he did was monstrous, but he is your son and he is dying. You will not forgive yourself if you don't go." Her simple words cut through all my confusion and went straight to the heart of the matter. She refused to let money be the end of the story. The next day, Isabella became an angel in my life. She went to our small church, spoke to the neighbors at the market, and organized a small collection. She did not expose my shame. She simply said that my only son was gravely ill in another city and that his mother needed to be with him. The response was a wave of kindness that left me breathless. People who barely had enough for themselves gave me what they could. $1, a few coins, a supportive hug. In less than 2 days, Isabella handed me an envelope with enough money for a round-trip bus ticket to Austin and a little extra for an emergency. The envelope, filled with small, crumpled bills, felt heavier in my hand than all the gold in the world. It was money made of compassion, proof that the humanity my son lacked still existed in abundance around me. The bus ride was a blur of arid Texas landscapes and internal reflections. With every mile that took me further from San Antonio, I felt a mixture of dread and determination. The sway of the bus was like the swaying of my emotions. I wasn't going there for him, I told myself. I was going for me, to close this painful chapter with dignity, not with bitterness. I held my small bag on my lap, where, next to a sandwich, lay the golden pen. The mansion in Austin was exactly as I had imagined: cold, impersonal, and ostentatiously wealthy. It looked more like a corporate museum than a home. The garden was too perfect. The glass and steel facade had no soul. It was a fortress designed to keep the, world out. And I realized he had succeeded. He was completely isolated in his prison of luxury. The house itself was a monument to his loneliness. Sophia met me at the door. She looked as if she had aged a decade. Her eyes were red and swollen, and she hugged me with the strength of a drowning person. "Thank you, Elena. Thank you for coming," she whispered. The inside of the house was even colder. Silence and the subtle smell of disinfectant hung in the air. It was the smell of sickness trying to be hidden by wealth, but failing miserably. She led me down a long, silent hallway to the master bedroom. The door was ajar. I peeked inside, and my heart stopped. The room was enormous, with a glass wall overlooking a sparkling blue pool. And in the middle of it all, on a king-sized bed, was Marcos. He was a pathetic figure, shrunken under silk sheets, his pale skin stretched over his bones. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a shocking fragility. I entered the room alone, my steps muffled by the thick carpet. He turned his head slowly, and his eyes, once full of fire and ambition, were dull and empty. When he saw me, a spasm of anger and shame contorted his face. "You shouldn't have come," he said in a hoarse, weak voice. "Have you come to gloat in your revenge, to see what happened to the bad son?" His hostility was a weak armor, and I refused to fight it. I approached the bed in silence. My anger, my pain, all of it seemed to dissipate, replaced by an immense, overwhelming pity. Didn't see the monster who had humiliated me. I only saw a scared, lost, and dying boy. I took the golden pen from my bag and placed it gently on the nightstand, next to a row of medicine bottles. The glint of the gold caught his eye. He looked at the pen, and then at me, confused. I looked back at him, not with the eyes of a victim, but with the quiet authority of a mother. My voice did not tremble when I spoke. "Your father," I began, "always dreamed of having a pen like this to sign important things. The only important thing I have to sign now is your forgiveness." I paused, letting the weight of my words fill the silence. "But forgiveness can't be stolen, Marcos. It has to be asked for." Those were the words that finally broke him. The tough guy facade completely disintegrated. A deep, agonizing sob rose from his chest, and he began to cry. These were not tears of self-pity, but of a monumental pain and guilt that he had kept bottled up for years. He cried like the child I remembered, a cry of pure remorse and fear. He confessed everything, amidst sobs and broken sentences: the fear of being a failure like his father, the greed that consumed him, the guilt that had haunted him every day since he abandoned me, and the paralyzing terror of death. And I, Elena Ramirez, the woman he had discarded, simply held his trembling hand, stroked his thinning hair, and let him pour out all the poison. In that instant, in the heart of my greatest pain, I found my greatest strength, the ability to offer grace when all I had received was cruelty. Are you enjoying this story? Leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Now we continue with the video. In the stillness that followed his confession, something in the room had changed forever. The tension that was once palpable had dissipated, giving way to a fragile, exhausted peace. With his eyes still teary, Marcos looked at me, and for the first time, I saw not the arrogant businessman or the guilty son, but just my boy. "I'll do the treatment," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "Not for a cure, but for time. I want more time with you." And in that promise, I knew his redemption had begun. I didn't go back to San Antonio. Sophia insisted I stay, and I stayed. I moved into one of the guest rooms in that immense mansion, a universe of luxury that was strange and uncomfortable to me. The dynamic was surreal. I was there, caring for the man who had orchestrated my ruin, in the house that had been bought with the money that was rightfully mine. But the irony of the situation lost its sting in the face of the urgency of life and death. Marcos's transformation was remarkable. The treatment was brutal, robbing him of his physical strength, but giving him back his humanity. In his lucid moments, he didn't want to talk about business or his material legacy. He wanted to talk about his childhood. He asked me to tell stories about his father, to remind him of picnics in the park, of homework at the kitchen table. He was a man on a desperate quest to reconnect with the soul he had sold so cheaply. One afternoon, he called his lawyer. With Sophia and me present, he began to dictate the changes to his will. It was an act of dismantling. He secured Sophia's future, and then turned his attention to the vast empire he had built. His gestures were weak, but his voice was clear. He was methodically undoing the knots of greed he himself had tied. Then, he looked directly at me, his eyes holding a clarity I hadn't seen in decades. "The rest," he told the lawyer, "everything goes to my mother." He paused, taking a deep breath, with a single instruction, that she use this fortune to do all the good that I failed to do, to fix what I broke. It wasn't a verbal apology, but something much more powerful, an act of restitution, a final act of contrition. The months that followed were a bittersweet gift. The disease progressed relentlessly, but Marcos's spirit was healing. We talked about the past, not with accusations, but with the melancholic understanding of one who sees mistakes with clarity. I cooked for him the simple dishes of his childhood, and he ate with an appetite that was more emotional than physical. For a brief, precious period, we were simply mother and son again. Marcos passed away 6 months later, on a rainy autumn morning. His death was not in the cold solitude he had built for himself, but in peace. I held one of his hands, and Sophia held the other. His last breath was soft, almost inaudible, and a look of tranquility finally settled on his face. He was free from his pain, his guilt, and himself. After the funeral, I found myself the sole heir to a fortune that felt tainted. The now silent mansion was a mausoleum of bad decisions. My first inclination was to flee, to return to my small, familiar apartment in San Antonio and forget any of this had ever happened. But Marcos's last words to his lawyer echoed in my mind. "Do the good that I failed to do." That wasn't a wish. It was a mission. And suddenly, I knew with crystal clarity what needed to be done. I thought of all the other Elenas scattered around the world, elderly people who were abandoned, forgotten, left to deal with poverty and shame in silence. My pain, I realized, was not unique. And now, fate, in its strangest twist, had given me the means to fight for them. With the help of a team of honest lawyers Sophia helped me find, I began the process of liquidating Marcos's assets. The sports cars, the stocks, the investment properties, everything was sold. My goal was not to live in luxury, but to purify that money, transforming a legacy of greed into a capital of compassion. My first and most important step was to establish the Ramirez Foundation, a non-profit organization with a clear mission: to offer shelter, free legal support, and above all, dignity to elderly people who have been victims of family abandonment. The foundation was born from my deepest wound, turning my suffering into a greater purpose, and the cold mansion in Austin, the symbol of my son's loneliness. It became the foundation's first headquarters and shelter. We began a major renovation, not to add more luxury, but to inject life. We painted the walls in warm colors, replaced the minimalist furniture with comfortable armchairs, and filled the rooms with plants and books. Where there was silence, there would now be conversations. The space that once represented emotional emptiness and guilt was reborn. The sound of laughter now filled the hallways that once echoed with despair. The pool, once an untouched mirror of water, became a place for water aerobics and socializing among the residents. The house ceased to be a tomb and became a cradle of second chances. My own life was the most transformed of all. I went from being a passive victim of my fate to an active agent of change. I was no longer Elena, the abandoned mother. I was Elena, the founder of a safe harbor. The pain of my past was not forgotten, but it was reframed, becoming the cornerstone of a legacy of kindness that Ricardo, my beloved husband, would have signed with the greatest pride. 3 years later, the Texas sun shines on a cheerful ceremony in the garden of the Ramirez Foundation. I am almost 80 years old, but I feel stronger and more energetic than I did a decade ago. I am no longer the woman bent by pain. My shoulders are straight, and my smile is genuine. Today, we are inaugurating the Foundation's AI third branch in Dallas. Hundreds of lives have already been touched, dozens of families confronted, and many elderly people rescued from loneliness. In my hands, I hold the golden pen. It is no longer a symbol of humiliation or a tainted inheritance. It has become the Foundation's ceremonial tool. With it, I sign the documents that guarantee a dignified future for others, the kind of important documents Ricardo always dreamed of signing. Each signature is a silent prayer, an act of memory and transformation. I look up at the blue sky, feeling the presence of Ricardo and the peace of Marcos's redeemed soul. The cycle of pain has been broken and replaced by a cycle of compassion. Have you ever made a gesture of kindness that changed a life? Leave a little heart if you believe that love is more powerful than any wealth. Subscribe for more stories of second chances. Comment, "Love has no price," if you also believe in human kindness.